In the storm-lashed realms of Asgard, where lightning carved scars into the heavens and thunder echoed like the heartbeat of war, the twin sons of Thor were born beneath an ancient omen. The sky split open with a thunderclap so fierce that Yggdrasil's branches trembled, and from the union of Thor, the Thunderer, and a mysterious mother cloaked in twilight, the giantess Jarnsaxa, or perhaps an enigmatic goddess lost to time, Magni and Móði came into the world. Their birth was not heralded with celebration, but with awe, unease, and silence. Even Odin watched from the high halls of Valsjaf, his one eye narrowing at the destiny unfolding. Magni emerged first, fierce and wide-eyed, his cries like the clash of steel on steel. His hands clenched instinctively, already bearing the pulse of thunder. From the moment he could walk, he wrestled the winds and challenged the storms, a child of action and courage who would rather fall in combat than stand still in peace. Magni's strength was staggering. Even as a boy, he could uproot ancient trees and toss boulders the size of longships into the sea. The gods called him bold, fearless, and dangerously eager, a mirror of Thor's own tempestuous spirit. Móði came after, quieter, colder, but no less divine. His name meant wrath, but in him, fury simmered rather than raged. His gaze bore into the bones of those who challenged him, a deep, smoldering force that chilled even the fire giants. Where Magni shouted, Móði watched. Where Magni leapt, Móði lingered, thinking, weighing. Yet he bore the same strength, equal, perhaps even greater, but never shone with such pride. Móði's rage was controlled, sealed beneath a veil of silence and thought, making him the darker half of the storm, the calm before and after the fury. Their mother vanished from the tales soon after their birth, perhaps taken by fate, or consumed by the chaos she had birthed. No saga tells her end. The twins, though different in spirit, were bound by blood and burden. As they grew, the gods tested them. Odin watched them with skepticism, knowing the twin sons of Thor could one day rival even the All-Father himself. The giants sought to challenge them, hoping to break them before they matured. Each trial sharpened them, Magni in defiance, Móði in endurance. Their father, Thor, was both mentor and mountain, a presence so vast it cast a long shadow. In his wake, the twins grew as his echoes, yet struggled to find their own thunder. Magni sought approval through deeds, felling beasts, challenging gods, saving mortal realms. Móði bore the weight of legacy differently, his strength forged in restraint, in the quiet fury of not being seen until the time was right. They grew not only as warriors, but as symbols of strength unbridled and strength contained. And in the gathering dusk of prophecy, as the end of days loomed ever nearer, the names of Magni and Móði stirred in whispers among gods and mortals alike, not as mere sons of Thor, but as forces destined to stand when even gods might fall. In the years that followed their youth, the twin sons of Thor grew into towering figures, not merely in strength, but in presence. The golden light of Asgard often fell upon Magni first, catching the gleam of his armor as he charged into new battles, sword raised and voice alight with thunder. He became a hero sung of in mead halls, slayer of trolls and breaker of mountain beasts, his name echoing through Midgard and Jotunheim alike. Every duel was a stage, every wound a badge, and every cheer from the gods of fire stoking his pride. Yet beside him, or just beyond the reach of the crowds, stood Móði. He walked the quieter roads, away from the war horns and the boasting feasts. In temples abandoned by time, among runes etched by vanished seers, Móði meditated with calloused hands resting on his knees. He wrestled not with enemies, but with the storm that churned in his own chest. While Magni's rage was unleashed in glorious fury, Móði learned to bind his, shaping it into resolve. He trained in silence, matching his breath to the rhythm of falling leaves, his mind sharp as the edge of lightning just before it strikes. The distance between them widened subtly, like a hairline crack in a blade. Magni did not understand his brother's restraint, and Móði rarely spoke of the fire he kept hidden. Yet their bond held, through battles fought side by side, through victories and doubts. Magni would look over his shoulder to find me watching his back, calm and unshaken. Me would feel his brother's presence in the clash of steel, knowing he never fought without heart. But the winds were changing. Odin's ravens circled lower now, and the old seers whispered of the time when brother might stand against brother, not by will, but by fate. The world stirred with ancient unrest, and somewhere in the silence of a growing storm, the gods watched and wondered, when the end came, would the sons of thunder remain united, or be torn apart by the very legacies they carried? In this quiet between glory and doom, Magni burned brighter than ever, and me, in the stillness of shadow, grew deeper, stronger. And so they walked forward, two storms with different centers, toward the tests that would define them. When the All-Father grew wary of the twilight creeping ever closer to Asgard's golden walls, he and Thor devised a set of trials to test the mettle of the next generation, the twin sons of thunder, born of divine blood and shrouded in destiny. These were not mere contests of muscle or valor, but gauntlets designed to reveal the soul beneath the strength, the heart beneath the hammer. The trials of worth. The first was the trial of might, and it belonged to Magni from the moment his boots struck the earth. Before a host of gods and ancestors, he faced the primal beast Hrungnir's kin, an elemental monstrosity birthed from stone and flame. With a roar that shook the valley, Magni met it head-on, shattering boulders with his bare fists and cleaving through fire with a swing of his blade. When the monster lay broken, he stood over it bloodied but grinning, the air around him crackling with applause. Even Odin, who measured pride as carefully as prophecy, gave a slight nod. Then came the trial of wit, and the crowd turned uncertainly to me. In a hall woven with illusions and lies, crafted by Loki himself, the task was to discern truth from falsehood, to pass through without striking in anger or falling into despair. Me stepped into that realm with no weapon but thought, and no guide but instinct. There, he was confronted with visions, Thor's disappointment, Magni's scorn, the world in flames. But he did not lash out.
He did not speak.
Instead, he waited, heart steady as stone, until the false world blinked away and the path opened before him. He emerged pale, but unshaken. Odin, watching from his high seat, said nothing, yet his one eye lingered longer on me than it had on Magni. With each trial, the contrast deepened. Magni crushed challenges with explosive force, lifting mountains, racing storms, wrestling Jotnar into submission. His feats became legend overnight. Me, meanwhile, earned quieter victories, calming a berserker god with a single word, deciphering a rune puzzle none could read, walking into a haunted wood, and returning with a pact of peace from spirits long forgotten. His success bred unease, admiration, and envy. The tension simmered. In mead halls, Magni grew louder, his voice a hammer strike with every boast. He spoke often of strength, of action, of how true warriors never hesitated. "What glory lies in silence?" he once asked, not realizing or not caring that me sat nearby. Me said nothing then, but that night, beneath the stars, he whispered to the storm, "Glory fades. Only balance endures." Their rivalry sharpened with each breath. Not born of hatred, but of difference, Magni's pride burning like a forge fire, Mia's skepticism as cold and deep as a fjord. They clashed in sparring matches where neither truly won, and walked away from each other with unspoken questions hanging heavy in the air. Yet in battle, they still fought side by side. For all their division, they knew they were two halves of the same storm, thunder and restraint, fury and thought. But as Ragnarök loomed nearer, the gods whispered, when tested at the end of the world, would the brothers stand together? Or would the storm break itself in two? One night, beneath the whispering boughs of Yggdrasil, the sky cracked not with lightning, but with prophecy. The Norns emerged from the mist-veiled roots, their eyes white as snow, their hands weaving threads that shimmered with fire and ass. All of Asgard stood still as the eldest among them spoke, her voice a dirge carried on the wind. The final war nears. Sons of gods and giants shall bleed alike. The wolf breaks free, The serpent rises, the heavens burn. A hush swept over the golden halls. Odin clenched his spear. Freya turned away in grief. Thor's jaw tightened, but it was the silence between Magni and me that seemed loudest of all. For years, they had grown apart, their bond strained by pride, silence, and the burden of expectation. But as the foretelling spilled from the Norn's lips, of Thor's fall beneath the serpent, of gods devoured, of the 9 realms crumbling, something shifted between the brothers. Later that night, away from the feast where gods drank to forget the doom at hand, the brothers stood alone at the edge of Bifröst, where the sky shimmered like broken glass. Magni spoke first, his voice stripped of bravado. I used to think strength was everything, that if I hit hard enough, I could silence doubt, yours, fathers, even the Norns. Me looked ahead into the darkness that stretched beyond the stars. And I thought silence would protect me. That restraint would make me something more than just Thor's son. They faced each other then, not as rivals, but as brothers. Weathered, proud, wounded. Me placed a hand on Magni's shoulder, steady and firm. We were wrong. It was never about proving ourselves. Magni nodded. It's about what we protect, what we leave behind. In that moment, the tension of a lifetime unraveled, not in a clash, but in understanding. For the first time, they truly stood as equals, not thunder and shadow, but 2 warriors forged by the same storm. And when the flames of Ragnarök began to rise on the horizon, it was not glory they marched toward. It was duty. The sky split open like a wound. Ragnarök had come, and with it, chaos unbound. The oceans boiled as Jörmungandr, the world-serpent, coiled its endless form around Midgard. Mountains cracked under the weight of marching giants. The sun turned black, and the stars fled. The end was not near, it was now. Amid the ruin of the Bifröst, Thor stood tall, red lightning dancing across his shoulders. On either side of him, Magni and me, his sons, one burning with fury, the other quiet as the storm's eye. Stay behind me, Thor growled, though both knew he did not expect obedience. This is my fate. But the brothers had made their choice long before the first horn sounded. They would not stay behind. They would fight beside him. Jörmungandr's hiss thundered across the sky. Its venom steamed as it dripped across the battlefield, melting stone and god alike. Thor hurled Mjölnir, the hammer splitting the serpent's fangs and cracking its skull, but the beast twisted, wrapping around him, even as thunder ripped through the sky. Magni roared, charging a fire giant and cleaving him in half with a blade forged in the heart of a star. Me moved like wind through ruin, felling enemies not with rage, but with precision, each strike a silent prayer for what was being lost. Then came the cry. Thor's cry. The cry that shattered both sky and soul. The world-serpent's venom had found his heart. Though Thor crushed the beast's skull with his final breath, he fell, slowly, heavily, like the last tree of an ancient forest. Magni stumbled toward him, eyes wide with disbelief. Father. Me stood frozen, the silence in his chest louder than thunder. Thor looked up at them, blood in his beard, lightning fading from his veins. He did not speak. He only reached out, his hand brushing the haft of Mjölnir, before it fell from his grasp. Then he was still. A silence fell over the battlefield, as if even the storm paused to mourn. And then came the rage. For the first and only time me screamed, not in fury, but in sorrow so vast it tore the clouds asunder. The sound cracked the sky, and lightning fell like rain. Magni, tears lost in the blood on his face, lifted Mjölnir. It sparked in his hands, resisting him, until me stepped forward, placing one steady hand on the hammer beside him. And for the first time, it did not belong to one hand alone. Together, they lifted it. Together, they became the storm. What followed was not a battle, it was vengeance tempered by love. The brothers, side by side, became Thor's echo and his legacy. They struck down frost giants by the dozens, shattered fire-born monstrosities, and stood between Asgard's heart and the end of all things. The gods fell. Heimdall,
Freyr, Tyr.
but Asgard did not burn completely, because two suns stood where one god had fallen, and their storm did not break. Not until the sky cleared. Not until the silence returned. The storm had passed, but its echo clung to the bones of the world. Smoke curled into the bruised sky from shattered halls and scorched forests. Asgard, once radiant and proud, now lay in ruin, its golden spires blackened, its walls broken like the ribs of a fallen beast. Rivers ran dark, and the air trembled with the weight of absence.
There was no song left.
No clash of swords. Only silence and ash. Magni stood on the edge of the shattered plain where Valhalla once rose, Mjölnir resting at his side. His armor was cracked, his face streaked with soot and dried blood, his breath shallow from the weight of rage that still smoldered in his chest. Beside him, me knelt in the dust. His hand brushed the stone, fingertips tracing a pattern half-buried, a carving from long ago. The world tree, its roots once thought unshakable.
He stared at it for a long time,
then looked up. "They're gone," Magni said, his voice like gravel. "All of them."
Me did not speak.
His eyes were hollow, but deep, like the sky after thunder. His heart had burned with fury, but now, only sorrow remained. "Father's gone," Magni muttered.
Odin.
"Heimdall.
Tyr.
Even the damn halls are gone. What do we do now? What's left?" Me rose slowly, turning toward the broken horizon where embers still floated like dying stars. He walked forward, past cracked stones and shattered banners, and looked upon what remained of Yggdrasil, its stump charred, yet still pulsing with a faint, green glow. He placed his hand upon it. "We don't chase the dead," he said, voice low but steady. "We don't hunt ghosts." Magni frowned, gripping Mjölnir tighter. "But the giants are dead too," me said. "So is vengeance. There's no glory left in it. Only ruin." He turned to his brother, and for a long moment, Magni saw him not as the quiet sibling in his shadow, but as something more, something anchoring.
"We rebuild," me said.
"We carry what remains, not to rule, not to conquer, but to remember, and to protect." Magni looked down at the hammer in his hands, then at the horizon. Slowly he nodded. The fire in him dimmed, not extinguished, but tempered. Side by side, they stood where the gods had fallen, and made a vow, not in thunder, but in silence. They would not be sons of wrath. They would be the seed of what came next. Through the cinders of the old world, two figures walked, brothers bound not just by blood, but by what they had lost. Magni and me, sons of thunder, carried with them only the clothes on their backs, the memories of fallen gods, and Mjölnir, once too heavy for any save their father, now held together between them. The hammer bore fresh cracks and scorches from Ragnarok's fire, but still sparked faintly with stormlight when gripped by worthy hands. They wandered the 9 realms, or what remained of them. Where once there had been splendor and endless conflict, there was now silence and ruin. Alfheim's forests stood as charred skeletons. Nidavelir's forges had gone cold. Midgard was a graveyard. And yet, not everything was lost. In the broken corners of the world, life clung like moss to stone. A dwarf child hiding in a tunnel beneath the collapsed halls of her kin. A Vanir priest tending to one last sapling beside a dried river. Fragments of people and power scattered like stardust across realms that no longer knew order. The brothers did not march like warriors now. They listened. They watched. They gave what they could. At first, Magni burned. He had been raised on strength and valor, his youth forged in contests and chaos. But now his sword saw little use. It was his hands that mended beams, his shoulders that lifted stone. Me, always quiet, became the voice when others faltered. He spoke not with thunder, but with a kind of steady patience, the calm between storms. Where Magni once mocked his brother's silence, he came to depend on it. And me, in turn, began to lean on Magni's fire, not to destroy, but to ignite new hope where ashes lay thick. One night in what remained of Vanaheim, under a sky no longer full of stars but of dust and drifting fireflies, they sat by a broken well. Mjölnir lay between them. "I used to think father was just power," Magni said, staring into the embers. "Like he was made of it. Like the world bowed to him, because it had no choice." Me turned, watching the flame dance in Magni's eyes. "But he carried more than a hammer," Magni continued. "He carried all of it. Every time we fought, every time he stood tall, he was holding back storms we didn't even see." Me said nothing. Instead, he looked upward, where the wind stirred the branches of a half-dead tree above them. It swayed, but didn't fall. "That's strength too," Me said softly. "To stand, even when you're broken." Their journey stretched on, through Folkvanger fields blooming with forgotten flowers, across the frost-bitten trails of a reborn Nibelheim. They weren't just survivors now, they were seeds. Wherever they walked, people began to gather. Not to worship, not to follow, but to build. Their bond, once frayed by pride and shadow, mended in moments of laughter beside children who didn't know what gods were. In silences shared beneath skies that would never again echo with Bifrost's call. Together, they became something more than sons of Thor. They became brothers, not just by blood, but by choice. And in that unity, the thunder stirred again, not in anger, but in promise. It was in the high vale of a new Midgard, where mist curled over soft green hills and rivers sang again, under the sunlight, that Magni and Me came upon them. The brothers had been following no road, only instinct, Mjölnir strapped between them, their armor worn thin, and their boots dusted with the ash of realms long lost. But as they crested a ridge, they paused, not from fatigue, but from wonder. Below them, in a meadow surrounded by the stone ribs of a long-fallen temple, people moved. Not warriors, not gods.
People.
Humans. Children, elders, and in their midst, a handful of lesser gods and forgotten spirits, once scattered, now standing tall again with calloused hands and humble smiles. They were planting crops in ash-darkened soil, building homes not from divine stone, but with their own hands and laughter. A woman hummed as she wove reed into rope. A one-eyed godling helped a boy shape a clay jug. Magni took a step forward and stopped, unsure. His fist tightened at his side. "They're not afraid," he murmured. Me, eyes narrowed and thoughtful, nodded. "They don't look to the sky anymore for thunder. They look to each other." There was no throne waiting, no banners raised in their names, no horns of praise. But there was life, resilient, imperfect, radiant. As they descended into the valley, a few heads turned. A murmur spread. A small child pointed at Mjölnir, eyes wide with awe. But no one knelt. No one bowed. Instead, an elder stepped forward. His face bore wrinkles carved by both time and hope. He held out his hand, not in deference, but in welcome. "We wondered if the last of you would find your way here," he said. Magni stared at the man's outstretched palm, then slowly reached out his own, calloused and stained from rebuilding ruins. Me stood at his side, quiet as ever. But his gaze swept the valley, the harmony, the effort, the unspoken unity. For the first time in what felt like 1,000 lifetimes, he exhaled, and it didn't taste of smoke. "We're not here to lead," he said, almost to himself. Magni glanced at him, brow furrowed. Me looked to the child still watching them. "We're here to stand. When others stumble. When storms return. When what's fragile dares to grow." The words rang like truth in the wind. And in that moment, they understood. They were not kings of a broken world. They were its guardians, its watchmen, the last sons of thunder, not to strike, but to shield. The hammer would still be carried, but not to command, to protect. And so Magni and Me walked into the valley, not as gods on high, but as brothers of the world reborn, their legacy no longer carved in ruin, but in the hope they would help others. In the years that followed the fall of Asgard and the rise of the New World, the names Magni and Móði were no longer spoken with awe alone, but with reverence.
They no longer sought battle.
Their swords, once sharp with vengeance, were dulled by the wind and the work of peace. Where once they had marched at the head of godly hosts, now they moved quietly among the scattered peoples of the 9 realms, replanting forests in Alfheim, calming storm-broken seas in Vanaheim, and rebuilding shattered bridges in the remnants of Bifröst. Their father's hammer, Mjölnir, still pulsed with the fury of storms, but now it rang not across battlefields, but through the sky to break the drought, call the rains, and shield the weak from monsters that still crawled in the shadows of a half-healed world. Magni, bold as ever, became a living pillar to the young gods and mortals alike. His strength was no longer proven by foes slain, but by the mountains he moved to dam floods and the hands he held aloft when communities faltered. The people carved statues of him with lightning in one hand and a child in the other. But Magni's proudest moments were not those seen. They were quiet ones. When he laughed while carrying timber beside mortal builders, when he stood watch over villages in silence through long winter nights. Me, ever brooding and composed, became the voice of storms subdued. Where Magni gave strength, me offered restraint. He meditated beneath trees grown from Yggdrasil's shattered roots, deciphering forgotten runes and guiding the newborn gods in the ways of wisdom. His words were slow, but when he spoke, storms seemed to listen. It was said that to hear me speak was to hear thunder rumble on the edge of a summer breeze, gentle, but always reminding the world of what lay beneath. Together, they became not just Thor's sons, but something greater, the embodiment of balance. Where thunder had once meant wrath and judgment, it now carried another meaning, power with purpose. Their story was told in every realm. In Midgard, children played with wooden hammers and learned that true strength protects. In Svartalfheim, dwarves etched their likeness into stone gates, not as warriors, but as wardens. In Niflheim, even the cold winds whispered their tale, not as threats, but as the guardians who stood when the gods fell. And thus, thunder became dual in nature. It could tear the sky and split the sea. But it could also bring rain to barren soil. It could roar in vengeance, and it could hum in harmony. Magni was the pulse, the outward force that never surrendered. Me was the stillness, the calm eye that held the storm in place. Their final transformation was not one of fire or a divine proclamation, but of choice. They chose to become not rulers, but keepers. Not feared gods of old, but the silent oath beneath the sky, that when the world called, thunder would answer. Not to destroy, but to remind all that power, tempered by care, could rebuild even the most shattered of realms. And long after their footsteps faded from the soil, their legacy remained, not in monuments, but in the quiet peace of storm-fed fields, in the resilience of those who remembered, in the balance that endures.